Welcome, everyone. I'm Izzy. I'm the Adult Services Library Technician with Lewiston Public Library, and you guys are here for our virtual program, Nature's Nightshift, with the Center for Wildlife. You will have the option to do Q&A here in Zoom, and if you're on Facebook, you can go ahead and type your questions and comments into the chat, into the comment box, and we will filter it into the webinar here. So here we have with us Kristen from Center for Wildlife, and with that, I'll let her begin.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Izzy.
Yeah, no
hi, everybody. So again, my name is Kristen. I am one of the educators at the Center for Wildlife. For those of you that aren't too familiar with us, we are a wildlife hospital as well as an education facility. We are located in Cape Neddick, Maine, so right off the York exit. If you ever hiked Mount Agamenicus, we're actually right at the base of the mountain. So our wildlife hospital treats lots of different orphaned and injured wild animals. We only treat wild species. We treat 190 different species in our hospital. So that's all of our birds, anyone migrating through, any of our pelagic ocean birds, anyone hanging out in your yard. We will take in all of those species, and those are usually well over half of our hospital patients each year. So usually between 1,000 to 13 or 1,400. We actually just had our 1,000th bird either today or we're going to have it tomorrow. We're really, really close. So we treat lots of birds. Our smallest group of hospital patients is our reptiles amphibians. So we will take in all of those species, even though sometimes we do get friends that are not actually from Maine and New Hampshire and the seacoast. So we will take in them, even though if they're not from around here, just to get them settled, making sure they have water if they need it, giving them a little look over, and then we will send them off to an exotic species specialist. So that's only about 100 to 150 of our hospital patients. And then our last group of patients are mammals. So we're mammals. We have hair. We call it fur with most animals, but it's just hair. We have live babies. We give our babies milk. So we treat most of our small mammals, so anything from a little mouse to about a porcupine or beaver size. We don't treat most of our bigger species, nor do we treat most rabies vector species, just because we don't have the facilities or the staffing to do so. We have over 100 volunteers between our clinic, our education, our development events. We only have a dozen staff, so we couldn't ask all of our volunteers to get those really expensive rabies shots. So our staff have our shots so that we can work with our bat ambassadors and our bat patients. But our volunteers truly make this place run every single day, and we couldn't ask them to do that. We are a nonprofit, so we don't receive any state or federal funding for the work we do, which also adds to how vital our volunteers truly are every single day here. We definitely couldn't do it without them. So we only treat bats, are the only rabies vector species, and we don't treat bear, deer, moose, any of those really big guys. So anything from a mouse to about a beaver, porcupine or beaver size. Jess, are we able to come to the Wildlife Center either with or without masks? So that's a great question, Tracy. So we do have on-site programs offering on our website at thecenterforwildlife.org. So you can go to our upcoming events, and all of our everything's ticketed right through our website. So we do require pre-reservations. We do require masks in the building. It's for our mammal patient, our mammal ambassador safety, because they can actually get COVID from us. So if something were to happen to Henry, our porcupine ambassador, or any of our mammal patients or ambassadors, we would be absolutely devastated. Which is why we are still requiring them in the building. Currently, we do not require them outside unless you are with a mammal or next to the mammal enclosures. But all that ticketing can be done right through our website. We are actually in our brand new home right now. So we were founded in 1986 by a local vet who realized there was nowhere to bring injured and orphaned wild animals. So we founded our center. We moved into a trailer for a couple years, had moved into a donated ranch house in the mid-90s, and I very sorely outgrew it. And when we first opened, we were only taking about 100 patients a year. We were on track probably for a record year this year of over probably 2,500 species. We usually have well over 2,000 animals in our hospital each year. Like I said, we're about to, if we didn't get it today, we'll be getting it tomorrow, our 1,000th bird of the year. So we are very, very busy in our hospital. And now we at least have the room to treat those animals, which we're so excited about. So we are actually in our auditorium right now, which we didn't have over in our old building. We had a little pavilion outside that could hold 15, 20 people or so, which of course in Maine during winter or a nice rainy day, that's not super sufficient for any groups that want to come on site. So we now have this beautiful auditorium space. We have a new nature center where all of our reptile ambassadors live, as well as some interactive exhibits. And people can purchase tickets to come to our nature center on Fridays and Saturdays. We usually do book out a couple weeks in advance. And then our classroom spaces downstairs, and we're so excited to finally be in our new home and have all the medical tools and all the space and all the education room that we truly need. So we're so excited. Tracy says, I recently heard animals can get COVID. Do you know anything about that? Yeah, exactly. Mammals can get COVID. That's how we got COVID, was from animals. So we call that a spillover event. So when a disease in one group of beings, in this point, it came from animals, was given to us, which is why it's going to be really hard to get rid of COVID anyways, because at this point, we've probably spilled it back over into animal species, mostly mammals. Mammals are the most likely to get it because we are also mammals. And within that, there are groups that are more likely to get them, just like how we technically can get rabies, but it's very unlikely where we have species that are also considered rabies vector species because they're more likely to get it. So there is a difference between who's more likely, but yes, the animals, and particularly our mammals, can get COVID, which is why we have to be so safe here at the center. Because if something were to happen to our ambassadors or our patients, we'd be absolutely devastated if something happened to them. I would never want to be responsible for any of our friends that everyone loves so much to pass away from getting COVID from us. So we still have to be very careful here at the center. So the friends that we're going to meet today are our ambassadors. That's what we call our non-releasable wild animals that live with us. Most of them have physical injuries. Some think they're human. We call that imprinted. It's kind of like the duckling found the dog or the duckling found the human, that cartoon. So that's a couple of the bigger reasons why we get patients and ambassadors, as well as being their homes being destroyed. We call that habitat destruction, intentional harm or people purposely hurting them, orphans, hit by cars, stuff like that. That's some of the biggest reasons that we get our patients and our ambassadors. But all of our animals that live with us permanently are pretty used to people. We go through a pretty extensive training with them to make sure that they're going to be used to seeing all you. And they are wonderful teachers to help us teach about what kind of animal they are, what we can all do to help. As well as show off their personalities a little bit, because they definitely do have them. I'm so excited for you guys to meet my friends today. Of course, this is a nocturnal program, or Nature's Nightshift. So everyone that we're going to meet today is nocturnal. They're awake and active at night. But before I do get started, I do just want to talk about the quick difference between nocturnal and diurnal. So that they're opposites. We are diurnal, so we are active during the day, we're eating during the day or moving around. But sometimes, yeah, we are awake at night, but we're usually not doing a whole lot. Maybe just hanging out watching TV or watching a movie. We're usually not going to the grocery store at 2 in the morning, mostly. So that's kind of how our nocturnal and diurnal wild animals are as well. So nocturnal really doesn't refer to when they are sleeping. It's more referring to when they're active, when they're moving around, when they're hunting for food, all of that important things. Because some of our quote unquote nocturnal animals we do see out middle of the day, especially right now during baby season. Mom has to have a lot of energy storage to keep caring for her babies, to make sure they have enough food. So sometimes we do see nocturnal animals out during the day, and that's totally okay. We get a lot of calls about people being worried about seeing fox and other wild animals, thinking that they might have rabies because they're out during the day. But really, they're mostly just trying to get enough food for their babies, because that's a lot of energy. It's just like humans. It takes a lot of work to raise babies in the wild animal kingdom. So that's usually why we do see some of our wild animals that we typically think of as nocturnal out during the day. But our first friend that we are going to meet, actually the first two friends we're going to meet, are two of our nocturnal raptors. So we have 6 types of raptors here in Maine. So hawks, eagles, ospreys, vultures, falcons, those are all like us. They're diurnal. Owls are the only nocturnal ones. So they have things that make them very special, because they're hunting at night. So they're built different, a little bit different than our other raptors. So our first raptor we're going to meet is the smallest type of owl that we have here in Maine. I'm just going to step off the screen so I can grab her for a second. Like we mentioned at the beginning of this, if you're watching on Zoom, you can put your comments or any questions you have into the chat feature. You go to the bottom. If you are watching on Facebook this evening, you can comment on there and it will be transferred over into the chat to the Zoom. But I will be right back once I grab my friend. So this is Artemis, and she is a northern saw-whet owl. So she is the smallest species that we have here in Maine. You can see she's about the size of my palm or so, but she's actually fully grown. She will not get any bigger than this. So she's the smallest, just like how we have Chihuahuas and Great Danes. She is kind of like the Chihuahua of the owl world. And then our screech owls would be a little bit bigger, and then our long-eareds, and then our bards after that, and then our great horns, and then the snowies. So those are typically the species that we see around here, Tracy. But worldwide, I'm not exactly sure on what that number is. I'd have to look it up. She is quite cute, isn't she, Tracy? So all of our ambassadors in terms of, is she friendly, Tracy? So we go through a pretty extensive training process as the ambassador as well as the humans, to making sure that both the animal and the caretaker are comfortable, being used to each other, being on programs together. So she has been with us since she was at least about 2 years old. She could be a bit older when she came in. We're not totally sure. Baby birds, once they get their adult feathers or their adult plumage, it's very hard to know how old they are. So she came to us in 2016. So she's going on at least about 7 years old. She could be a bit older than that. We're not totally sure. So I've gotten to know little Artemis over the last couple of years, and as she has gotten older, she's actually one of our little old ladies. So when we go into her enclosure, we are actually always talking to her, because she's actually fully blind at this point. She went blind about 2 years ago now. So she cannot see anything at all. So sometimes that's why you'll see her looking around, and our owls, especially when they're on programs, tend to look at us when we're talking. But Artemis, when she is listening very intently, especially in this room right here. There's a lot of echoes. So you'll see her looking around and around because she's really tuned into that hearing without that vision anymore. A lot of times you'll hear humans also say that when you lose one of your senses, the others tend to be enhanced. So she's always listening. She actually has an incredible sense of hearing anyways, though, because she is one of our species who we believe can hear just by her hearing. She doesn't actually need her incredible eyes. But those eyes are absolutely huge in her head. So they take up about a third of her skull. So you can see she has that beautiful yellow, if she looks back, as most of our owls do in Maine. Most of them do. The only exception is our barred owls. They have chocolate brown eyes with, of course, the black pupil. But they have a lot more rods and cones than we do. So we have the same parts of the eyes, but they have a lot more of them to help them basically have night vision. So those eyes are huge in their head. And this is basically what we would look like if we had owl eyes. So big yellow eyes, the size of softballs or grapefruits. And this actually depicts pretty well what having owl eyes would be like. So owl eyes actually go straight back in their head. They're basically out little tubes. So they cannot move their eyes like we can, where we can roll our eyes, we have peripherals. Owls don't have any of that, so they can only see directly what they're looking at. And that's why they have to move their head. So they can turn about 270 degrees. So she will probably not let me show you. Maybe what our other friend will show you. So that basically means that they can go directly behind them a little bit more, come back straight forward and do it the other way as well. But that is because they can't move those eyes. They have to be able to see everything that's going on around them. They actually have double the amount of vertebrae or neck bones than we do. We have 7, they have 14. They actually have more than a giraffe as well, which is pretty cool. Amy asked, how old do owls live? So in the wild, a saw-whet owl will typically live for 5 years or so. So she is at least 7. So she's a pretty old little lady. In captivity, of course, our animals typically spend a lot more time with us because they're going to the doctors. We make sure that they have food every day. So they're pretty set in how they're being taken care of. So they do tend to live quite a bit longer, but of course we're never guaranteed that. So we have had our ambassadors start to have vision issues, like both my friends that we're going to meet today. Sometimes they get arthritis. We have had some of our ambassadors get cancer. So they start to get some of those human old issues as well, which tells us that we've given them a pretty great life with us. We're really proud of that. If we can get them to the age where they're running to human old age issues, that means they live a pretty successful life here in captivity, which we of course want the best for them. So she is 8, but we are still learning more about these species. We don't typically see them as often because she's small. She's what we call a secondary predator. So she hunts, but she's also hunted by all of our bigger owls. So she would be hiding in a tree cavity all day and most of the night to make sure that she stays nice and safe. But she's a species that actually a lot of times hunters will hear and see because they'll be sitting in their tree stands, for example, and feel like something was watching them all morning. And then they'll turn around and see a little saw-whet owl head poking up. So they are going to sit at usually about eye level or so, maybe a little bit higher, and very quietly so that predators, including humans, we're big predators to them, don't find them. And then they'll just sit and wait for the predator to go away. So their name, the northern saw-whet owl, actually comes from pioneers thinking it sounded like grinding a whetstone, which doesn't mean a whole lot to us anymore. So we sometimes refer to these guys as the car alarm owl as well. So their call goes like beep, 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 beep. So, so hunters will see them and hear them when they're hunting, but we generally aren't going to see them on a normal basis by any means. Saw-whets were also actually made pretty famous actually this past winter. If any of you remember the little owl that was found in the Rockefeller Christmas tree that had been taken down. It was a little tiny saw-whet owl, just like Artemis, that had been brought to a wildlife rehabilitator and then was given time to heal and then released back to the wild. But they are a pretty common species with bird banding as well, as they migrate from the mountain areas to the coastline during the fall. So they're not going to really go south. They're just going to migrate to the coast, where even some of our bigger species, like the screech owl, who's a little bit bigger than Artemis, will tend to actually go a little bit farther south because their food isn't necessarily here. They prefer insects like moths and crickets. But Artemis would definitely prefer small little mammals like small mice and voles. Do you feed them? Amy asked, do you feed them live animals like mice? Does her blindness cause her issues in catching animals? Yes, and yes as well. So we do not feed our ambassadors, with the exception of our corn snake, live food because it is not safe. It's not safe for them. They're injured or they don't know how to hunt, so they'll get hurt trying to hunt food. And our corn snake Zipper doesn't think dead food is live food. He's ate live food his entire life. He already ate live food before he came to us. So we have tried to get him to eat dead food. He just doesn't think it's food. But yes, we feed dead food to our ambassadors and a lot of our patients until we're getting ready to test fly some of our raptors. So when we do get we have a couple owlets right now that are getting ready to be released in the fall. So they're growing, getting bigger, building up their muscles. So we do test fly them. So we will give them mice to practice hunting. So we want to make sure that they can hunt before we release them. But for the most part, no, we do not give live food. Tracy, do you ever try to release back to the wild, or do they live at the park? So here at the Center for Wildlife, we have all of our hospital patients and then our ambassadors. So our ambassadors are all non-releasable. They will never go back to the wild. Most of them have physical injuries that prevents them to be able to survive on their own. Some of them think they're human and we call them imprinted. So our ambassadors will never go back to the wild. Either they physically cannot do it or they just don't know how to do it. But the ultimate goal for our patients is always to put them back to the wild where they belong. I certainly love our ambassadors, just like Artemis and our other two friends that we're going to meet today. And they are wonderful, wonderful teachers to help teach about their species and why they're with us and what we can all do to help. But our wild animals deserve to be wild. That's where we all like our freedom, and we wish we could give it to them as well. But they do get to live pretty cool jobs with us since they can't go back to the wild. They wouldn't survive on their own. Right, Artemis? Good job. Can you look back? So she has these two little pin feathers. Oh, sorry, a little hard to see on the screen. So she cannot fly very well. She can't get around. So she was actually transferred to us from Tufts Medical Clinic. They did surgery on her toothpick, tiny little bones. Unfortunately, they had her for about a year. They let her molt, which they do about once a year, usually in the summer, late spring, early summer. They're going to replace their feathers once a year. It's a very energetically costly behavior, but they need to do it because feathers do break throughout the year. So they will molt and get new feathers during the summertime. But however, they did the surgery, kept her for about a year. After she molted, they realized that she damaged the follicles that her little flight feathers, those little end ones, come out of. So she cannot fly silently, which is very important for our owls because predators would find her. And she also doesn't get around very well. So that is why she is with us. But the fact that Tufts was able to even do surgery on her little toothpick-sized bones is quite amazing. Amy asked, how do owls clean themselves? That's a great question. So all of our birds do what's called preening. So they're going to take their feathers. So I don't think I brought one over here. Man. So if you think the main part of the feather, so there's going to be all those parts on the side, and then sometimes those pieces on the sides come unattached. But there's a little microscopic little hook on them so that they all are connected. So they're going to use their beak to preen, which means that they're going to fix all those tiny little hooks so that the feathers look perfect. Their mates will also help them preen. And then they're going to use, they have a little gland, right at the base of their tail called the urogenial gland. And they're going to run their beak through that gland. It's a little oil gland to help condition the feathers. So they're going to get a little bit of oil on that beak and then spray it through each little feather to make sure they stay nice and conditioned so that they don't break. But that is how they're going to clean themselves, is through their beak. If she also has some dinner left on her beak, it's called feeking. So she will take her beak and rub it on a branch or something to help clean it off as well. Good job, Artemis. So I'm going to bring out our next friend, who is also an owl friend, a little bit bigger than Artemis, but another friend we don't see as often. So I'm going to step off the screen for a second, put her back. Again, if you guys have any questions or anything, you can certainly drop it in the chat if you're on Zoom, or in the comments on Facebook as well, and we'll get back to them. Good job, Artemis. Good girl. So we started off with our little old lady, and now we have our little old man. So this is Leo, and he is called a long-eared owl, which is a very funny and ironic name because you can see these little tufts on his head, kind of like little horns. They're not actually ears, even though he's called a long-eared owl. They are just feathers. We actually call them plumicorns, which is a really fun word. His ears, just like Artemis's and all of our owls, are actually on the side of her head, just like us. So you can see that beautiful brown ring around his face. So that's called a facial disc, and it basically acts like us hearing with our hands up to our ears, makes them a little bit louder and a little bit clearer for him. But he has one high and one low, and actually one straight, a little bit forward and a little bit backward. So that means he can hear everything going on all at the same time. He is a type of owl that would be very strictly nocturnal, just like Artemis. So we do not see or hear these guys often at all. They're actually a species that is migratory here along the coastline. So in Maine, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Vermont, they typically migrate from the boreal forest way up in northern Canada to the southern and mid-Atlantic US. So they're only here for a couple weeks a year. But actually over in New York State, they actually a lot of times will stay there all year round. So they only migrate along the coast, which is very interesting. Right, Leo? You can see this beautiful coloration to him. His wings actually are about double the length of his tiny little body. We do call him a little owl. because those wings are much bigger than the rest of his body. He only weighs a little over 2.5 of the weight of Artemis, even though he obviously looks quite a bit bigger. Can you show your wings off? Yeah. Like, stop. So Leo is our little old man. He's going on at least 17 years old. So he is also starting to have some vision issues. He also has arthritis. And just like Artemis, doesn't enjoy the commotion of a classroom or anything anymore. And so he still goes on walks in the sunshine. That's pretty important for their feather health. And just like us, they enjoy hanging out in the sun. But he doesn't really enjoy classes anymore. So we use him for some of our virtual programs, and occasionally if we have a smaller group coming in, he just gets a little bit more nervous. Tracy, yes, I noticed you changed gloves. Does that have to do with his size or his talons? It is a little bit of both. So he does have a little bit bigger talons. But also because of his arthritis issues, he just like prefers this glove for balance. And since he is a bit bigger, if I had the little glove that I had for Artemis, his talon would be a little close to the edge of the glove. So I wouldn't want myself to get hurt. Because especially with his arthritis issues, sometimes his talons get stuck. So we try to avoid to making sure that those very sharp little talons don't end up on my skin, because it doesn't feel very good. All of our raptors, I have a great horned owl talon actually right next to me too. As you can see, it has feathers go all the way down. This is about 10 times stronger than the strongest human. So great horned owls are our largest resident owls that live here all year round. They're just a bit smaller than our snowy owls that we see passing through during the winter time when they're on their migrations, and we're actually their south. But they're very, very strong. They use their talons just like forks. So I didn't mention it with Artemis, but they can stay here where their bigger cousins like our screech owls typically don't, because they will actually cache food. So they will catch a lot of food when it's plentiful during the fall. And then they will actually hide it and let it freeze. And then just like we take meat out of the freezers when it's cold and there isn't a whole lot of food, they'll go to that place where they cache that extra food. They're gonna put their mouse into their talons and tuck it up against their body. And just like that, that's how they defrost their mouse to eat. So those talons are very, very strong. And then they are gonna use them as forks, where they would normally be using those sharp hook beaks, just like a knife, to tear all that food up. So both are really important for, of course, hunting and making sure that they can capture their prey. Snowy owls are a lot of people's favorites. They're actually really, really cool. I actually have a wing over here from a snowy. This shows you a little bit of the size difference. They are very large birds, and we are really lucky that we get to see them here during the winter time. It's funny to think that we are their south. When we say birds go south for the winter, we're their south. They do go a little bit farther south from here. They will go down, so like Jersey, Delaware, Maryland. But that's really it. They don't go too much farther than that. They're not going to go to South America, for example. Too warm for them. Right to me up. Can you fix yourself? Oh, I know. So these guys are actually pretty unique. Most raptors don't communally roost. So if you ever get to see one of these guys in the wild, you could possibly see over 100 of them in a tree all sleeping together, which is really cool. But you might have heard him making his little sounds earlier. I've never heard him make like their full call. His calls are kind of like, oh, oh, oh. But that's mostly the noises he makes. Sorry, bud. Are your talon stuff? Might be able to show you. I don't know if you guys can see all that right there. So along that edge, If you see that little fringe, that's called a fluted edge. Like I mentioned with Artemis, she cannot fly silently anymore. That fluted edge is very important for that. So that fluted edge is going to break up the wind as they flap. And then their feathers are also very soft as well. So that's how owls have silent flight. So make sure that if you're Artemis or if you're the size of Leo, your predators can't hear you moving around. And if you're a big owl, like our great horns or our bards, then your predator or your prey cannot hear you coming. But Artemis and Leo are both species that we generally don't see too often because they are going to be pretty strictly nocturnal. Whereas our bards and our great horns, we do sometimes see during the day because they don't have to be too afraid of predators, where Artemis and Leo do. So he's one of the most strictly nocturnal species, only active dead middle of the night when there's nothing going on at all, to help him make sure that he's nice and safe. I'm sorry, your talon's stuck. You're okay. Leo. Awesome. So I do have one more friend for you guys to meet. Leo's arthritis is getting the best of him right now, so I'm going to put him back. So again, if you guys have any questions, I'll put them in the comments. The next one is going to take me a second to prep for, because we are moving on to our nocturnal mammal friend that we're going to meet. So we do have plenty of species around here. One of the species that we're going to meet, though, is actually the most likely to get COVID from us. So you'll see when I come back that I have an extra little outfit that I have to wear. So I will be right back once I get myself all changed and ready to go. But again, if you have any questions, I'll be right back. So I am so excited for you all to meet my next friend. She's actually one of our newest ambassadors to join us. So we are so excited to have her, and she lives with her friend that she came with, as well as our other ambassador for species who's been with us since 2016. So you can see I have a scrub on. I have a mask on that's actually my mask just for working with her on programs. And we only do her on virtuals. Otherwise, she has to be in a container behind a screen, actually. So with any of our rabies vector species, anytime you find one in the wild, definitely want to make sure you have leather gloves. This is how we make sure that we are keeping ourselves safe, as well as making sure that we're not unintentionally going to be hurting our animals. Because she is a rabies vector species, they're the only rabies vector that we do treat. If we were to get bitten, even though we have had our ambassadors for quite a long time, so we know that they do not have rabies, there's no way they would have gotten rabies. If we were to get bitten through our 2 layers of gloves, we would have to automatically euthanize our bat ambassadors in case that they potentially did have rabies, which unfortunately we know they do not, which makes it really sad if something were to happen. So this is Bindi. Bindi is a big brown bat. We are going to feed her breakfast, or her dinner, I guess we could say. So she is getting mealworms tonight. That is what we feed our bat ambassadors and our bat patients. In the wild, they'd be eating actually a lot of mosquitoes. They are wonderful little neighbors to have around. They can eat over 1,000 mosquitoes each night. Of course, then helping us with mosquito diseases that we can get, like Zika, Triple E, West Nile. So big brown bats are definitely wonderful friends to have around. Catherine asks, how do we find out they're blind? With the owls, so when we do their cleans and their enclosures, we like to rearrange, we like to give them new things. And we were noticing that they weren't eating, or when they were seeing them doing that scanning behavior with their head. Then we have an eye specialist who comes in. Our clinic staff can look at their eyes as well. But as we always like to have multiple opinions just to make sure everyone's seeing the same exact thing. And that's how we determined that she was fully blind, was first by watching her behavior and seeing that she wasn't eating, she wasn't getting around, she wasn't moving, she was staying in one spot, she couldn't see where anything was. So that's how we watch, is watching their behaviors. Tracy says, I know that idea bats are so small. Yeah, and ironically, she's called a big brown bat, Tracy. So she does have she's the most common type of bat we have around here. So they actually have a cousin called a little brown bat as well. That used to be very prevalent as well. But they are about half the size, and they're actually now endangered throughout a lot of their parts of the US because of a fungus called white nose syndrome. So most of our bat populations are not doing great. We believe we've lost 80 to 90% of our bats due to this fungus that was originally found in the Catskill Mountains in New York. So these guys do go through, they don't go through true hibernation, but they go through a state that's similar to it, where little brown bats do actually go into true hibernation. And what happens during the wintertime, so they will go into a cave or an attic. Sometimes we hear them called house bats as well. They will go into that spot, and they're going to hibernate through the winter and not move, not do anything. But when they get this fungus, so normally they're constantly grooming themselves, making sure they're nice and clean. But then this fungus makes them very itchy around their face, around their wings. And then they wake up. But all of our bats here in Maine are insectivores. You can see I'm feeding her little mealworms. She'd be eating mostly mosquitoes in the wild. But of course, there are no mosquitoes in Maine during the winter time. And so they wake up and then they starve, unfortunately. But she is in the wild going to use her wonderful echolocation to find her food. So there's a myth, bats are not actually blind. So blind as a bat is not actually a true saying, even though we have heard it. They can see somewhere to us, so it's not great at night. Obviously, we don't have great vision at night, but they can definitely at least see a little bit. But they're primarily going to be hunting though through the echolocation. So they're going to send that little vibration out, just like our whales and dolphins send that little ping out. And then when it comes back to them, that's how they know where their food is. That's how they're going to catch their food, those little mosquitoes, as they're chasing them around at night. You can see those huge ears that she has to also help her hear all of that. Good job, Bindi. Tracy asks, can she fly? She cannot. So we're not totally sure exactly what happened to her. She joined us. She was transferred to us with her friend who we named Bobby. So they had come from another rehabber. So we're not sure why they actually can't fly. It's possible. There's a lot of things that can happen to bats. So like Betty, our big brown bat ambassador, who's been with us since 2016. She was caught by a cat and has a very obvious wing injury. But sometimes with babies as well, when it's really hot, they sometimes fall from where they're roosting. So sometimes that happens. So we're not totally sure why her and Bobby cannot fly. There's nothing very obvious physically looking at them, but they are both at least 2 years old. I know you're all done. She's like, well, that's a problem. Amy asks how many mealworms does she normally eat? So she actually gets the most of the three of them. So Bindi, Bobby, and Betty all live together. And Bindi gets 22. And then the other two both get 10 and 14 right now. We do change them depending on the season, but we do also communally give them food. And so sometimes the others eat a little bit more than their share. And Bindi says, okay, guys, you can have my food. Oh, sorry. So the food's gone. So now we are very squirmy. So she is one of our newest friends. So she's still getting used to all of this. So she's saying, all the food's gone. I have stuff to do. I have places to be. Yeah. So right now you can see her when she's opening her mouth. She's saying those tiny little pings out. So I'm gonna put her back. I do have a little bio part that we can talk about a little bit. Because now she's antsy. I know. There we go. But she eats mostly those mealworms. Catherine asks how many teeth does she have? I should probably know that. I don't actually know how many teeth they have. That's a great question, Catherine. I would definitely have to look it up to be sure because I wouldn't want to give you the wrong answer. But they do have tiny, tiny little teeth to help them crunch up their food. This is another big brown bat. This is one of our bio parts that we can bring on programs and teach about bats. So this is mostly how we've been teaching about them since they cannot go on adventures still. None of our mammals can. We have to be so especially special with our bat ambassadors just to make sure that they are the most likely. We have to be very, very careful. But we have over 1,300 species of bats found worldwide. We are constantly finding more species. So the big brown bats are the most common here. But we also see little browns, reds, sometimes Indianas, tricolors. We do get hoary bats as well. But the big browns are probably the most common at this point species that we have here. But not very big, relatively. Smaller than the size of my hand, my palm or so. But all of our bats here in Maine are insectivores. So we do have bats all over the world. They eat lots of different things. So all of our guys eat bugs, but there's some bats throughout the world that eat fruit, fish, meat. And then of those 1,300 species, there's only 3 that are what we call vampire bats. So vampire bats actually use those tiny little teeth that they have to make a tiny little slit in their food. And then they are going to go up to a cow or a sheep. And they're going to use those teeth to make a tiny little, about centimeter little slit in their food source or in the vein of that leg of the livestock. They're going to lap up with their tongue about 1 teaspoon of blood. That's it. And then their saliva actually has basically a liquid Band-Aid in it. So they don't want to hurt their food source, of course. They don't want it to get sick from them eating it. So the liquid Band-Aid cleans up the little cut that they made. So the livestock has no idea that they even lost 1 teaspoon of blood. That's it. So they're not going to come suck your blood. There are a lot of myths that surround our bats in particular. They're not going to go fly into your hair. The best thing you can do if you ever do have one stuck in your house, for example, is to open the windows in the room it's in, and then shut the doors so that it can find its way out. So it's going to be sending that little ping out through the echolocation to try to get out, but you don't want to be yelling, you want to be running around trying to hit it, because that's more confusing. If you just are very absolutely quiet, open the windows and leave the room, shut the door, and wait for it to fly out on its own. That is the best case scenario. If you do ever find one on the ground, of course, like I mentioned with our rabies vector species, you want to make sure that you use thick leather gloves to make sure that you do not get bit, because otherwise we do have to use, any hospital does have to euthanize the animal to make sure that they don't have rabies, even though there's a good chance that they don't. Only less than 0.5% of our bat population do actually get rabies, so not very many of them. So you want to have thick leather gloves and actually put it up on a tree or something like that, because they cannot actually get off from the ground. So if they're on the ground, they cannot fly. They have to be up high and then be able to lift off from there. Tracy, this is the first time I've seen a bat up close. She actually kind of cute. Are her friends the same size? Yep, all three of them are big brown bats. Betty, Bindi, and Bobby. Amy asked, do all bats live in caves or some live in trees or other areas? That's a great question, Amy. And yes, you're exactly right. So our big brown bats, our little brown bats, they tend to live in caves, in attics. Sometimes we refer to them as house bats, because they do get into walls and attics and stuff like that. But there are species that do just live in trees. They're going to live under a layer of the bark. So all of our bats, our 1,300 species, do have their own little habitats that they live in. Most of our bats here are going to live in attics, those big browns, little browns, and then reds and hories tend to like some of the trees and underbark. So many great questions. Awesome. So I know we do have a couple more minutes. So I just want to make sure if anyone had any other questions, I could talk forever about all my friends that live here with us, but definitely make sure if you have any last minute questions, I can certainly answer them on our Zoom or on Facebook. I have a couple other cool things that I can show you guys, since Bindi decided she was not into it after her food was gone. Because of course our other nocturnal animals that we have around here, besides our owls, besides our bats, of course our opossums. We do have a little opossum ambassador named Olive, who is actually still in training. She's about a year old. She has some developmental issues, so she's about half the size she should be. And then I have I have a beaver skull, so not the porcupine skull I thought I had. But you can see those bright orange teeth that our rodents have, and porcupines have them as well. So those are our porcupines are also nocturnal, walking around the forest floor at night. What kind of training or schooling do you have to do for this job? So I actually learned a lot of this actually through an AmeriCorps program working for the Maryland State Parks. So I was working in the nature center and helping with some park ranger duties, but I was also working at our aviary through the Maryland Conservation Corps. So I was helping take care of our raptor ambassadors and our reptile ambassadors and bringing them to schools and stuff like that. So that's how I learned a lot of this. A lot of what we do here really isn't something you can learn in school. It's a very specialized information set. So a lot of our educators have environmental backgrounds. We've had people that have been trained teachers who decided they didn't want to work in a school anymore. We've had communication backgrounds. Our wildlife staff a lot of them have vet tech degrees for learning the skill, like the actual skills, like taking x-rays, taking blood, giving medicines. But we treat 190 species in our hospital, and none of them are our pets. So we do work with partner veterinarians in the area for just extra eyes. But all the information that our wildlife specialists and all of our wildlife staff have is a lot of on-the-job learning. So a lot of our staff have started off as interns and volunteers, and have made their way up. So if any of you have any wish that you want to do something like this, definitely look in the closest area for you. Just trying to get in somewhere as an intern or a volunteer, because it's really the best way to learn all of this, is learning how our wildlife hospital works, working with our ambassadors. It's the best job in the world. And Tracy, you're welcome. Yeah, so the Center for Wildlife, we are down in Cape Neddick, at the base of Mount Agamenticus. Again, I'm from the Center for Wildlife. So we are a wildlife hospital with education building. So it has definitely drastically changed. We just moved into our brand new 16,000 square foot facility over the winter. So we do have ticketing for our events. All of it is pre-registration only though. So we do not allow any drop-in groups at the moment. Our ambassadors are actually still in their old homes. We're in the process of building them all new enclosures over on our new campus. So our old campus is not open to the public right now, obviously for safety concerns. We don't want people wandering around when we are not over there. So we are not fully open in that sense to the public. Of course, we are taking hospital patients 365 days a year. So we are not the Wildlife Park in Gray. We are the Center for Wildlife. We're actually two different entities, but we do partner with them as well as Squam, Jane Kelly with On the Wing. So we do have this vast network of researchers and falconers and educators and wildlife rehabbers, helping all each other. So when someone calls our hospital, we can tell them if the animal has to come into us or if it should go into another place, wherever is closest, and depending on what species it is. It sometimes can't cross state lines like the rabies vectors, but we all do work together to make sure that all these animals are getting the best care possible. Awesome. So if anyone has any last questions, I can certainly answer them. But I'd like to thank the Lewiston Library for having us. I'm so glad that I could see all of you today.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was amazing. I just was like heart eyes over the owls and bats. So cute.
Yeah, they're pretty cool. Oh, you're welcome, Amy. It's the best job in the world. I absolutely love my job.
Yeah, I'm jealous. I like being with books all days, but little animals are pretty cute.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm actually our nature center lead. So I do a lot of our, like I take care of a lot of the reptile exhibits, building new exhibits that we're gonna put in here and planning. It's so much fun.
Awesome. All right, thank you, Kristen. Thank you everyone who joined us. Yeah, if you want to check out the Center for Wildlife, their website's thecenterforwildlife.org. And yeah, thank you all for joining us. Hope to see you next time.
Awesome. Have a great night, everybody.
Bye.